Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here out on the bench already might appear sort of like a work in progress, and that's exactly what this is. It was really intended just to be sort of like a quick off-camera check-in on my cocoon nursery. And for me, a cocoon nursery usually just means it's a batch of harvested casting in which I expect to find worms because perhaps during the harvest process I saw a lot of cocoons, or maybe because during the harvest process I knew that I was being kind of sloppy and I allowed a lot of straggler worms to remain in the material as I was harvesting and separating worms. And that's actually sort of a combination of both situations happening here. So this material here has been already hauled out once. So I already did empty the two little bait stations, which are what you see off here on the side. And I already started a new worm bin with the worms that we hauled out once before, and that's my newest system that you see right here. And it was launched off 11 days ago. And I guess the reason the camera is now rolling and I brought you guys down here to keep me company was because I didn't expect to see so many worms as what I'm bumping into, but I'm sort of pleasantly surprised with just how many worms are assembled here in this thing. So when I went to go grab the camera, I also prepared a little illustration to help describe what's happening here. And that haul out of worms 11 days ago with which we started that new container over there is depicted over here, showing the two little bait boxes, and this is the container right here with the castings in it. So the castings really originated with the haul out, or actually with the harvest of a container 46 days ago, which I had seen a lot of cocoons in. That's why I wanted to leave a few weeks for the cocoons to all hatch. And then another harvest of two more bins 20 days ago. And then I came back only one day later, 19 days ago, to set up the bait stations. And those bait stations ran for 8 days, and that led us to 11 days ago, at which point we did the first haul out of the worms. And with everyone's input, we ended up with this estimate that you see right here. It's always with everyone's input that I try to collect information from everyone that was watching, and with 19 people's estimates, that includes mine as well. So mine plus 18 viewers' estimates in the comments. We came up with a variety of different estimates, and that average of all those estimates amounts to a number of 342 worms living in that newest container over there. And you know, what I saw, I think even, I don't know, I tell you the truth, I haven't even looked inside the bait boxes themselves. All I was interested in doing was pulling the bait boxes out temporarily so that I can kind of mix all the material so that the more damp material on the bottom can be brought to the surface, and all the stuff out here on the surface that has been drying to bring that down in. And the whole idea behind that was to come up with somewhat drier material throughout, causing the worms to want to, you know, drive into the collection boxes, into the bait boxes. But, you know, the first thing I did was when I pulled the bait boxes out, I saw worms all around in the material surrounding where the bait boxes had been, in their holes. And I started fishing all of them out and just, you know, stacking them inside those bait boxes. And then I started digging down again, trying to just do what I mentioned earlier, which was to do the tilling up of the material, getting the more damp material from down low up to the surface and get the more dry material out on the surface mixed in, ending up with an overall somewhat drier material throughout. And you saw what I just did right there. This is what I've been seeing every time I would till up a handful of material out of this thing. I would just see little pockets of worms hanging out in little oases. So I mean, the bait boxes were here in the middle, but that little handful of material that I pulled up out of the corner had a whole bunch of worms hanging out in it. And I just couldn't seem to resist wanting to pull a bunch of them out while I was at it. And I figured, you know, it seemed like a realistic thing to do today is to just proceed with what I started here and perhaps just go that little extra mile of actually seeing what we could do about rounding up a whole lot more worms for a haul out number 2. Because what I had depicted over there was kind of abbreviated, but right there, that HO number 1 was the haul out number 1 of the bait boxes, or, you know, of the material in, or the, you know, what am I trying to say? The haul out of worms from here. using the bait boxes to launch off that new bin. And we've been talking about wanting to build up that population in the new bin with more worms from here. And it just seemed like a realistic thing to proceed with here, as long as I was going to be stirring the material up anyway, and I knew I'd be bumping into worms. I figured I would just keep picking them out individually when I saw them. But I think for every worm that I pull out manually this way, I bet you there's just as many still within the material at large, which means I will be setting the bait boxes up one more time to continue after we finish haul out number 2 here. And then I'm going to go ahead and release whatever worms get collected here into the new system, further increasing the population in that new bin, which I must admit started out pretty small, pretty puny little population to start a new bin with, but I knew we'd be coming back into here for many, many, many more worms later. And I'm almost kind of getting this feeling that the worms I'm collecting here today are going to be well in excess of what we collected 11 days ago to launch off that new system, because there's just worms everywhere. And maybe just over those past 11 days, a lot of the worms that might have been a lot smaller then have now grown, just a little bit more, making it easier for me to see them, easier for me to snatch them out of the material. And then, we'll just let the process continue once we're done. And I guess it's a little frustrating every time I see cocoons, and I see them all over the place still in here. I thought that by now all the cocoons in here would have hatched, and that all the baby worms are making their way over into my collection boxes, but there's a lot of material in here, and a lot of the material is quite damp still and cozy. No reason for the worms to want to leave. So I am kind of wondering how much longer this process will continue. I mean, the last time you guys saw this container, I had sort of reset it off camera, and all I did was I lifted up the plastic covering just to give you a little peek that the bait boxes had been reset and put back into the material. And there was a plastic sheet covering this whole thing, but I started thinking, hey, if I want to motivate the worms to exit this material, it's best that it continues to just dry. And as the material becomes drier, the worms are going to seek out a more comfortable place to be. So besides coming back here to remove the plastic cover, I had already come back in here with some food, and I replenished this with some additional food. And then I came back in here a couple times, as recently as yesterday even, just to spray more moisture into these collection boxes. So I've been managing these off camera, but it finally got to the point with this little check-in that it did seem realistic to, do another haul out, get haul out number 2 under our belts, increase the population of worms in that other container, and perhaps capture a little bit of it on film here. And then this system will just go back the way it was, back up onto the shelf, with all the material sort of stirred around, hopefully a little bit drier now, hopefully a little bit less comfortable for the worms to want to just stay put in, and hopefully get them on the move, looking for more comfortable stuff to be in. Ideally leading them over to my bait boxes so that they could be collected and pulled out of here. So I kind of thought that I might continue with what I'm doing here while I'm speaking, but I thought I might just shut my mouth and complete what I really wanted to do, which is just a mixing of all the material in here, while at the same time I'm just continuing to pluck out any worms that I spot along the way, and not worry too much about capturing every single one of them, with the knowledge that I'm going to be resetting the bait boxes and resuming the baiting of the worms from the material after I've done what I could here to try to make the whole batch a little bit drier. So I think I'm going to proceed with closing my trap and just continuing with what you've seen me doing here for the past couple minutes until such a time that I feel like I've kind of gone around the entire system, collected up a good number of worms, and then we'll get this thing out of the way. I'll probably do the reset of the bait boxes and the return of this system to resume what it was doing here off camera, but I'll get you guys back on here really quick at the end, so when we release these worms I can get a little bit more feedback from the viewers on just how many worms it was that we've released here out of haul out number 2 into the new system. And then we'll be able to update the estimated population of that new system with the addition of these worms. Okay, so I believe it's quite evident, just from what you saw there, that there are lots and lots of worms in this material. And to just put this stuff away as if it was harvested castings and then maybe use it in the garden right away would have certainly been a missed opportunity in terms of gathering up all these worms. I mean, a lot of these worms would have still all been in their cocoons way back when I first harvested that first system. And when I harvested the second 2 systems, knowing that I had so many stragglers left behind in the material when I collected up the worms to launch off my breeder buckets. And that's really what happened with the worms that came out of the 2 systems that got harvested that I depicted on the illustration. Those worms were collected up and used to launch off some breeder bins, but I really do kind of have this feeling now that what we've got in these 2 bait boxes probably well exceeds what we had in the first roundup of worms hauled out after the first 8 days. These last 11 days, I believe, we might have actually gathered even more worms on this go around. And hopefully I've stirred up all the material nicely now to bring up all the more damp stuff that was down really low and submerge all the stuff that had been out near the surface drying, so that the worms are further inspired to try seeking out more cozy living conditions. And then once these go back in, maybe we can even round up more. I'm almost certain of it. We're going to round up many more. So I'm going to empty these 2 bait boxes into a little plastic container so we can try to get a better look at what's in here. And then we'll get my newest bin out here, the 11-day-old bin that's off on the side, and we'll release them. And then I'd really like to hear people's thoughts on just how many worms it is that we've got here, and then I'll be updating my total. All right, so let me get things reset over here for the next stage, and we'll pick up where we left off momentarily. So into this little round container will go the contents of the 2 bait boxes. And this will give us the opportunity to see how things turned out. So in addition to all the worms that you saw me individually pulling out, there's also going to be the worms that voluntarily made their way into the bait box over the past 11 days. So I'm going to use a little stick that I've got here to try to gently extract the worms from the bottom of this bait box, because I've tried using just my finger to get them out, and the bait box just happens to be the perfect size so that the worms at the very bottom manage to evade my attempts at extracting them. And I guess if there's 1 or 2 remaining at the bottom, I can fiddle with it later. I just want to get the majority of them out. And then I believe that the whole reset of these bait boxes and return of the bait boxes to the box of castings will be something I'll probably just do after the video ends, because there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff to be seen with me just stuffing a couple of these boxes full of paper and food items. In fact, I'm going to have to make my way upstairs to grab some yummy morsels with which we can reset these bait boxes. So my idea here was to empty bait box number 1, sort of pick it apart a little bit, possibly even recycle some of the bedding. so that we can use it to get the bait box reset, since the material's already nice and seasoned and cozy for the worms to want to hang out on and in. So we'll take a look at what it looks like we have as far as a worm haul here, and then we'll probably just return the paper that made it up over to the bait box. And I guess maybe if some of the food that made this thing up was left over in great quantities, we'll recycle it, because that's really what went in here last time 11 days ago, was whatever the worms had not eaten over the first 8 days was picked clean of any worms hanging out on it, and then I just returned it to the bait box. But I guess the one difference was that when I rebuilt the bait box, I used larger single sheets of paper versus a whole bunch of tiny shredded stuff like what I had in here originally. Because it seemed to me like if it's just one sheet of paper sort of folded up, I could just unfold it, shake off the worms, and then I don't have to worry about the worms sort of hiding in between many layers of, or many little pieces of shredded paper and cardboard. I guess the only thing I'm struggling with is finding the spot at which I sort of folded this whole thing over onto itself. And it does seem like, as far as leftovers go, there's quite a bit in here. It almost seems like the worms hardly even managed to make their way in. Maybe I just did too good a job sort of folding it in side of the paper. So, I don't know. I try to assess what I did previously so as to see if I could use what I learned in the process to improve on the next go around, sort of a lessons learned. And I guess we'll see how many worms got together. I guess maybe the tricky part here is going to be fishing them out from in between the layers of paper here. Perhaps sheets of paper folded over like this is not even the best way to manage it. I suppose all this stuff could simply just go with the worms over into their new home when we release them. And by the way, the tub here, this is the place where they're going to be moved into momentarily. I just thought it would be nice to try to get a sense of how many worms it is that we have here by sort of liberating them from the surrounding materials, and perhaps in the process we can get a better idea of what we're dealing with here. And I also kind of like the idea of having some of this material recycled and returned into the bait box. Almost making me wonder how much of it they've actually eaten over the past, I don't know, what was it again? It was 20 days ago? Or 19 days ago? 19 days ago, 8 and 11, right? So these pieces of pumpkin actually did go in here in the first round of baiting, and a lot of it was just sort of recycled and reused in the reset. And it's just kind of interesting to see how much of it actually remains. I almost thought that a good portion of it would have already been chewed up, but maybe it was just too well hidden within all of this paper. Maybe they sort of came in and they could sense the yummy pumpkin, but perhaps it was adequate for them to be within the nice moisture of the environment, and maybe they were just content to nibble on the paper, because the paper would have probably been soaked with the juices of the pumpkin. And the paper itself is just wood pulp, something that the worms can certainly utilize as a food source. So perhaps they were completely content just to nibble away on the paper itself and never even drive inwards to try to find the pumpkin. So here and there I'm just doing my best to release worms from this material, but it's certainly not so important to get every last one of them. Maybe I'll just do my best to shake off as many worms as I can, and I'll set these chunks of stuff aside so we can use it to reset. Or well, you know, I'll reset after I stop rolling here, because I believe this is already going to end up being a fairly long video. I do plan on rolling back a lot of that footage at fast speed, so by now you will have already seen that. And hopefully I didn't prolong the length of this video beyond a lot of people's tolerance. Because I know I do sometimes make rather long, drawn-out videos. Maybe this would be something worth fast-forwarding to as I try to clean off the worms from this material, and then we'll try to get one quick look at them before we get to work on doing the next batch from the other bait box. Alright, so I think that's close enough. Certainly doesn't have to be some sort of a perfection job, and man, you could see there are a lot of little itsy bitsy tiny worms throughout this material, combined with a few larger ones, but mainly small ones, I would have to say. Because it did seem to me like the material that came out of that first box that I harvested, with which I started the cocoon nursery, was where I was going to probably get the majority of the worms from all the cocoons that I observed. And then, you know, I got to admit, there were a lot of straggler worms that fell through the process when I was harvesting the latter two boxes that I showed earlier. But I think we should probably bring a close to subjecting these poor little guys to all this handling. Why don't we just go ahead and drop them into their new home. I'm going to just set the top coverings aside briefly so we can gain access to their system here. Yeah, you know, when I came in here last time to feed a few days ago, which was actually their first feeding, I forgot to put the grid in, so I just sprinkled the grid in across the top surface here. And you can even see leftovers of the last feeding, but that's irrelevant. That's not what we're here to check out. We're here to just release these little wormies and reunite them with their family. The first batch that got hauled out to start this system. I was just wondering what this big clump of stuff was over here with that kind of fuzzy mold growing on it. Yeah, the material feels pretty good. Nice moisture level. But let's go ahead and see what we could do about scooping this container clean of all the worms and material that's in here and boosting up the population of this system. So this will be everyone's sort of last chance to check out how many worms we've collected here, and you know, maybe it would just be easier using my hand. Here I am trying to use a stick when I've got my gloved hand all ready to go to almost perfectly extract every worm from this plastic container so much more easily. Lots and lots of worms. And even though it might not look like much, just by being sort of in the palm of my hand, like I said, I just want to remind everyone how small these little worms are. So a couple dozen worms can look like practically nothing, but give them a few weeks, perhaps a couple months, and once all these worms get to a mature size, they'll be much more impressive to see. So let's let them get situated in their new home. I think we've got them all. And then I could get to resetting the bait boxes. So I grabbed just another few little wormies that were off on the plastic over there while I was resetting the bait boxes. I figured while we allow these worms here to just sort of get settled in, I would mess around with the bait boxes, and I figured, you know, by having all that bait wrapped up within that paper, we're hardly even exposing the bait to the worms. So I figured let's just toss the stuff in a little bit more haphazardly so that the bait itself is much more accessible once the worms enter the bait boxes. And then maybe I'll just top that stuff off with some damp paper or whatever. And then I got to cover this stuff up and put it all away and all that other fun stuff. But you know, I'm not going to keep you around for all that. I got plenty of stuff to do here, which is not that interesting. So let me just sign off here. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And don't forget, I'm looking for everyone's estimates on how many worms we just added to this system. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, so please put it in the comments. And, oh yeah, besides giving me a quick thumbs up, if you think I deserve it, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.